He's got it all, really. I don't know. I remember I cut some block house, but then or he was, but then he decided. This was in 19, I think, like 70.
You guys should arm wrestle for it, right? Arm wrestling, it's more fun to watch.
That was ridiculous.
I just
Wouldn't take long.
I realized how many hundreds of ways that was insensitive. It was fun.
Instead of calling it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I shut that up, yeah. I put together the
And you
SBQ.
can retire.
That
It's a great thing.
I'm thinking that we just do the climate action plan, show plan. No. We're going to abolish word refresh. If anybody does that word again, they have to pay $100 in the call.
We're gonna put a jar out, like a spare jar.
We're not calling
I don't
it,
drop anymore.
we're calling it the blender. I'm gonna stick my,
You're gonna stick your hand in it again?
but
I shouldn't be.
there are two things that I need to.
Sure.
I need
Well, it's
to,
easy to get everywhere, except as soon as you hit Berkeley or Richmond, even sometimes now, it's like going into like a marshmallow, and it's just traffic. But it takes an hour to get from Berkeley to San Francisco, where it should, even with all the fast track.
so how many people have a conflict on this farm, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's so crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Well, just add planning, I guess. There's no change. It's just a little And then you take the bar in. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Or you could do you can do, where okay, but you could do that in the train, so you can do the, goes all the way to, it only goes up. And you gotta get on bar to go. It's pretty nice, I mean, I do that.
Oh, how fun.
No, not the.
No, I'm sorry. My mom is shocked.
Well, they have the.
Call to order the meeting of the Winter City Council on Tuesday, November 5th, 2019. Tracy, can we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Councilmember Anderson?
Here.
Councilmember Lauren? Here. Councilmember New?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Cowan? Mayor Bianchi?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Bill Schreiber, would you lead us in the pledge of allegiance, please?
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Moving on to approval of the agenda.
Mayor and Council, a couple of changes tonight. Staff's requesting that we pull item F off the agenda, and item J, I didn't get the agenda report out in time, but this really is an urgent item. So if we can, I'd like to hold it down to the discussion item number 4, and I'll walk you through the staff report.
Okay. And I think we may have a few conflicts on some of these items. So just go with that prior to voting even, or?
Right on. We can do that when we come to it.
So, all in favor of the agenda as with the changes John described? Aye. All opposed? All in favor? Unanimous, sorry. Okay, we'll go on to council staff comments. Councilmember Lauren.
All right, I will apologize for my lack of brevity on this, but it was a really busy 3 weeks.
Yeah.
On Wednesday, the 16th, so the day after our last council meeting, I flew to Long Beach, League of California Cities Annual Conference. I got there, went to the award ceremony for the Torch Awards. I'm wearing my pin. It's a leadership award. I attended a presentation on CalPERS. They gave a strong message to pay down the city's unfunded actuarial liability, along with other suggestions. It was a slideshow presentation by Lisa Littleton, a CalPERS board member. Later on, I went to a presentation whose actual proposal and design was from John Donlevy. It was when wildfire strikes, what to expect and how to prepare. Chico's mayor, Randall Stone, was there. Lauren Gill from Paradise presented, and our very own Dana Carey, emergency manager from YOLO. She was there, and she kind of led the whole charge on everything. She was amazing. Fun fact, Cal OES debris removal was 2 times that of 9/11 on Paradise Fire. Yeah. I attended the general session. I attended the Sac Valley Division lunch and was elected second VP for the Sac Valley Division. So means I'll be their president in 2 years. The Rural Information Exchange got rolled out. So the League of California Cities will actually have like a component for rural cities, and I know all of us have been pushing for that. I attended the Latino caucus meetings, the Women's caucus, and in the closing luncheon, I was sworn in to a 2-year position on the board. So I will be, it's a rural position, so I will represent other rural cities. On 11/20, I missed YOLO Fest. I hope somebody attended. 11/21, I attended the transportation meeting, which was a revisiting transportation on behalf of Harold with YCTD. I also used Harold's notes in the presentation and the meeting. On 10/23, I attended YOLO Leaders with Mayor Biasi. There was a really dynamic presentation on behalf of YOLO Youth and with YOLO Youth. On 10/25, we're almost in November, right? On 10/25, Kate Ladish and I attended Congressman John Garamendi's Women of the Year celebration. Kate Ladish and I co-nominated Lisa Baker and Kathy Speck, and both were honored. Their accomplishments will be read into the congressional record later in 2019. I attended and worked the inaugural Spooktacular Run alongside Rotary and Hispanic Advisory Committee and in supporting roles. And I can tell you that with 60-mile-an-hour winds and all the other things, the changes that had to happen, our city manager, John Donlevy, just hit it out of the park. It was pretty amazing. And I think we made a bunch of money for good causes. I attended on 10/26 the Concilio dinner, which was in Woodland, and received the Pilar Andrade Community Service Award. The Hispanic Advisory Committee was also honored, and I'm hoping that they could come in maybe on the next meeting and kind of show their trophy. On 10/30, I briefly attended the senior event at the community center. And later that night, the Hispanic Advisory Committee planning meeting for Dia de los Muertos. On 10/31, I met with a resident, Sarah Madison. She's the lady that puts on Porch Fest, and she has some really exciting ideas about bringing a youth center to Winters, and I hope it happens. On 11/1, I met with Kent Anderson, Pew Creek Council, for a meeting on Dry Creek. Basically, there's big needs in Dry Creek. There's too much arundo. It's a fire adaptive plant, needs to be removed, and there's some concern about the lowering of the channel, undercutting the channel. We'll meet again. On 11/2, I attended briefly the Salmon Festival, and I just want to give a shout out to Carol Sienna, who puts on an amazing festival, and it was really well attended. I was there briefly, and
Wasn't by myself.
and no, it wasn't by myself. Nothing ever is, right? And then Dia de los Muertos followed that, and that was with the Winter Cemetery District at the Winter Cemetery, and it was a blast. And on 11/4, I met with our city manager, John Donlevy, to discuss tonight's agenda and followed by a League of Cities Sacramento Valley Conference call at 12. And I really need a nap. That's all. That's a lot, right?
Yeah, thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. On a couple items to report. Attended the Salmon Festival on Saturday. It was very well put on the show. I thought it improved over the years. And the day was just stellar with being outside. And on Tuesday, the 29th, I attended the Affordable Housing Steering Committee meeting here at City Hall.
Thank you. Councilmember New.
I have a few things to report on. The October 17th, I attended the SACOG board meeting in Sacramento, and on the 23rd, Mill County Housing Board meeting, and then on the 30th, another SACOG meeting in Sacramento. On the 30th, the meeting was from 9 to 3, and it was called the Regional Futures Forum meeting. And many speakers talked about what they had done to improve their cities, and their presentations were good. Unfortunately, many of the presentations were talking about cities like 15 times bigger than ours or even more. And so it was interesting to hear what they had done, but it didn't all apply. There was one speaker who spoke about his town in Mississippi, Meridian, Mississippi. And the interesting thing about that, his town was also, I think he said 50,000 plus, but the downtown looked just like ours. And so that was interesting to see. And again, they talked about what they had done. But he left us with one thing that I thought was quite interesting, if I wrote it down, I hope I did, about how they worked in their city and what they planned for. And what he said was, they look at what they were, what the city's history was one thing, and then what they are at present, and then plan out what exactly they want it to be in the future. And the way he put it, that's very simplified, but it was an interesting way of dealing with things, looking at restoration of some buildings, and they restored some, not exactly the way they looked before, but with the feeling of what the town had been. So that was interesting, and that's all I'll say about that. On the 31st, and that was the SACOG board meeting. Also, the 2nd of November, the Salmon Fest, I was there, and again, it was well attended, and I thought it was very well put together. And on the 2nd, I went to the Palms. Doesn't exactly fit in the city business, but was encouraged to go by our former mayor, who had a vested interest, I think, and so there were 3 plays that he talked several of us into going, and it was very enjoyable. So that's it.
Thank you. On October 17th, we had a site meeting at the Olive Grove Development Project, and trying to see what kind of progress they've made on putting in drainage improvements so that we don't have flooding there like we had last year during our heavy rains, and sorry to report that they've done very little. It's unfortunate that they're not making more progress than they are. On the 22nd, I attended the Planning Commission meeting. There was a presentation from Crown Communities on potentially developing a piece of property that goes around the LDS church. On the 23rd of October, I also attended the YED Talks with Councilmember Lauren, where they had discussions on positive youth development and different ways of engaging our youth and keeping them involved with all the things that go on in our cities and our communities. So I thought that was very good. And we had a lot of interactive, talking, going on, sharing ideas with other people from other communities. And on the 27th, I was also at the Spooktacular Fun Run. Really good for our inaugural fun run. I thought we had a good turnout in spite of the gale force winds. But good job getting all that organized, everybody that was there. On the 29th, I attended the Affordable Housing Steering Committee. We heard some information about the Walnut 10 development project, which is a 10-acre site on East Street. And also a presentation from NeighborWorks, who is a group that does some of the self-help homes, where we have some on the east side of town that were built that way, where people actually put in sweat equity on it. So we heard a presentation on that. I thought very interesting. It might fit for a piece of property that the city has here for some affordable housing. On the 30th, I attended the Yolo County Town Hall that we had here with our Assembly members, Cecilia Aguilar Curry and Senator Bill Dodd. It was on healthy aging. They presented a lot of good information for our aging community. On the 2nd of November, I also attended the Salmon Festival. I just want to say thank you, Carol, Christine, Christopher, all of you, and the other staff members from the city who were down there working. I thought it turned out really good. There was a lot of good information on what's going on in the creek and the fish and all that, so good job. On the 2nd, I also attended the shrimp feed at the Winters Fire Department. Another good event put on by the fire department. A lot of people there. I don't know if it was sold out, but if it wasn't, it was pretty close. And on the 4th, I met with the city manager to go over tonight's agenda. And that's all I have. Yes.
I left something else.
Yes, sure, you can answer.
I wanted to say that when I attended the Regional Futures Forum, our city manager was there, and we drove over together and back. And so he got to hear all these speakers also. And I haven't spoken too much to him about that, but we did have a good discussion this morning when we went over the agenda about planning for our city and things that we might want to try to do. So I just want to make sure that you knew that he was there too, and he heard some of the same things that I did. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for all your time put in on these committees. And congratulations to Jesse for your award, for your leadership award. Good job. And also for being vice president now, right?
Second
Vice
VP,
president.
yeah.
So for the Sacramento Valley Division, good job.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for representing us well.
Sure.
All right, we'll move on now to public comments. This is for anything that is not on tonight's agenda. If anyone would like to speak to anything that's not on the agenda. Okay, we have 2 people, so if you want to, there's, you fill out a form and you can bring it up. There's some forms in the back. You go ahead and come up and fill it out afterwards and then hand it to Tracy. We'll have your name on here.
Good evening, everyone in City Council. I'm Chuck, the owner of the Pizza Factory, behind Pizza Factory, all the way up to Preserve and Buckhorn. I had a contractor come over to take a look at doing something for me, to give me a bid. Tripped and fell because the alleyway is not ADA compliant and it's very rough, uneven surfaces. God forbid if there ever is a fire in the pizza factory and someone in a wheelchair or with a walker has to go out the back door and can't traverse the ground because it's so rough and uneven. So I was hoping we could get something put on the agenda to maybe start addressing that in small pieces to where we can get that addressed over the next year or so. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. We can't really discuss it tonight, but
No, I
we'll
understand.
take your comments and
All right.
thank you very much. We have, I think, Kate, did you have a hand up there?
I can do this without dropping something.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Kate Ladder, 400 Morgan Street, number 21. And I think this will be the last lap swim update from the 2019 year. And so even though city staff, and I really appreciate what city staff did to throughout the year, but also to try to find a way to reopen the pool. And so city staff and lap swimmers really worked hard on exploring some different options. We had 4 lap swimmers who volunteered to go through guard training in order to get things going again. And ultimately things didn't work out for this year. And so we're really looking forward to the next one. So I just wanted to take this time to briefly highlight some of the positives that came out of this year. The first is that there's a really enthusiastic, dedicated group that shows up to lap swim. And it doesn't matter what the weather is, people are gonna be out there swimming and showering in the driving rain or whatever's going on. And one of the things that really becomes clear in talking with this group of folks is not only is the pool a tremendous resource, but that group is a tremendous resource as well. Socially for each other, but also it's really a group to tap for different ideas, and there's some different expertise going forward. And so I think there can be some tremendous discussions that come out of that. A few of the just nuts and bolts highlights or positives would be that I think in September it must have been, when or late August, whenever it was, when we had a discussion about how we could move forward to have the pool open through October. And so the bar was set for that we needed to have 15 swimmers pre-purchase October passes before the end of September. We had over 20 people buy passes and buy them well ahead. And so that's one brief measure of the enthusiasm that this group has. And I know that this year, one of the highlights that lap swimmers, if they were here, would urge me to mention is that the group really appreciated how, especially as we moved into the second part of the season, that guards changed from acting more like attendants to acting more like guards with real eyes on guarding. And so there was a change in a really good direction with that. And it's something that lap swimmers really appreciated, and that we look forward to that aspect carrying on next year. So I'd like to conclude by just, again, thanking the staff who worked really hard this year, and Tracy, just above and beyond, so thank you. And Diana worked hard to kind of ferret out everybody's addresses when we needed to do refunds. And I really appreciate the conversations that City Manager John Dunleavy and I were able to have to kind of explore some different ideas about how to do this. Thank you again.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to a non-agendized item tonight? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent calendar.
We don't council a couple of items, but do we want to draw next to see who can vote on item C?
So, yeah, we have 2 council members who have a conflict with item C, I believe, which is water drain pipe. Due to their proximity to the project, they both live within a 500 feet buffer zone, so they cannot participate on a vote on that project. So what we believe is the age-old solution of drawing walnuts.
Okay, so one of the nets says go, and one says stay, so. Who wants to pick?
I think that'll be. It looks like you want to.
No doubt.
There it goes.
And for the record, it says go.
Go.
Got it.
You need to
So
put this.
Councilmember Anderson will not be voting on item C.
Right, and to be clear, he does not need to recuse himself because it's on the consent calendar. It will simply, Tracy will register it as and we did not vote on that item because of this conflict.
Hey, Mayor and Council, a couple of items. Item A are the minutes from the October 15th regular meeting of the City Council. Item B is an amendment to the contract we have with Lestios Associates regarding our influence screen project. This is just basically a reserve for some of the final inspection that needs to be done on the project. Item C is council's purchase authorization for storm drainage pipe for a project that's now underway, 500 feet. We actually found two things that were out there. One, we found a massive water leak in one of our mains that led us to find some major failure in the overall storm drainage. So anyway, this is the purchase of the pipe for that. Item D is the report, the reappointment of Gar House. Gar's here tonight. Gar came in and applied to be our representative on the Sac Yellow Mosquito and Vector Control District Board of Trustees. And Gar is not only now locally trained, but I think he went to the statewide conference on mosquitoes and vectors. So when the swarms come at your house, he's the guy. They give you like PDT or whatever that, you know.
I didn't know.
Item E are the changes in funding for the parking lot and Newts Expressway projects. Probably one of the biggest things is that when you're digging in a 120-year-old downtown, you just find massive footings that you didn't know were there, and it adds to the overall project. Item G is an on-call contract with Gumshoe Group. Within our police department, we do both internal affairs investigations as well as background checks on potential hires. That's what they do. Item H is a resolution for the budget adjustments. Council's aware, we actually do most of our spending in the third and fourth quarters of our fiscal year. Ultimately, that means that there's open purchase orders and final payments that need to be done that are moved forward into the current fiscal year. So that's what happens here. Item I is the purchase of really three components of the system. First is a human resources information system. This is a cloud-based system for our overall management of all of our employees, hires, human resources information. The second component is a new payroll system. We're going to get away from paper and all of that, go to a more automated system for our payroll. The thing that's nice about it is that it actually produces a lot of our mandated reports that have to be filed both with the state and the public employees retirement system. The third component is a scheduling program that'll help with our overall public safety, both police and fire. It's actually a little more complex than people think, how we schedule folks. So the three components of this system, overall, it does add some costs to the city to the tune of about $18,000. But when you add it up per full-time employee, it's about $350. The one thing we haven't calculated is probably this very significant amount of staff time that we're going to save on the automated production of a lot of the reports. So that's the consent calendar.
I have a question on that cost of $18,000 that comes out of various accounts that's spread across the different accounts that use it. Is that right?
Yes.
Any other questions, comments on this?
One quick question.
Yeah.
Item E,
Yeah. Do you have a conflict with item E? Is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay, so Councilmember Anderson has a conflict with item E on the consent calendar due to proximity. He has property located near there, so he will not be participating in the vote on item E.
I believe it would be items E and F, because F is a separate item related to the underground utility.
We pulled that.
Oh, you pulled that, okay, sorry.
So I would move to approve the consent calendar items as stated with the stated changes.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None? Passes unanimously. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to no presentations. We'll go to discussion. Item number 1. Second reading and adoption of ordinance 2019-02 regarding the planning agency and chapter. This is the vacation rental ordinance.
So we've been at this now for 17 months, and tonight's the culmination of it. I think the saddest thing is that Dave Dowswell, our contract planner, isn't
Yeah.
here, but I waved him off simply because he costs money when he shows up. Mayor and Council, this is the second reading of the ordinance, which adds to the municipal code overall land use regulation regarding short-term vacation rentals, also known as our Airbnb ordinance. At the end of the day, what this does is really 4 basic things. First, it has people who are doing this type of business at their home, they have to have a business license. The second is that there's noticing of the neighbors. Third is there is required inspection for fire, life safety issues. What does that mean? It means that they have the proper occupancy to do what they're doing. They have a window, and they have the fire smoke detectors and the CO2. The fourth item is that if it's going to be an unhosted, it will require a conditional use permit. That's the extent of this ordinance. So with that, staff's recommending that you waive the second reading and adopt ordinance number 2019-02.
Okay, any questions? We've had a lot of discussion on this. Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak to this item? No? I just want to say, I think, I'm glad we've got to this point. There's a lot of work done on it, so something that we need to do. I think, so definitely, I will go ahead and open it up for a motion.
I'd like to move that we waive the second reading and adopt ordinance 2019-02, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Warreners approving proposed amendments to Chapter 17.12, planning agency, etc. as stated.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, none? Passes unanimously. So we now have an ordinance on vacation rental. We are hoping that, I know that this type of ordinance won't prevent the type of massacre they had in Orinda, but it will help us to do some enforcement on these types of rentals, so. Okay, we'll move on to the waive the second reading, adopt ordinance 2019-04, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Winters amending the Winters Municipal Code to add chapter 13.20 to be entitled to the Community Choice Aggregation. This has to do with our Valley Clean Energy, which we've talked also about a couple times now.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, you've already had the presentation on it.
So we have a, Councilmember Anderson has a conflict on this item, so. Due to the fact that he owns stock in PG&E. Thank you.
So Mayor and Council, this is the second reading of this ordinance. In the previous meetings, the councils had presentations from Valley Clean Energy. At the last meeting, the City Council did a couple of things. First, it introduced this ordinance. Under California law, and the Public Utilities Commission requires that all local governments who choose to become a part of some type of community choice aggregation process, you actually have to incorporate that within your municipal code. That's what this ordinance does. At the previous meetings, the council also adopted a resolution voting to both become a full and an associate member of Valley Clean Energy. The overall effective date of that won't be until 2021. But tonight, this is just the second reading. This amends the municipal code. It inserts the necessary parts of our city having a community choice aggregation program, and it'll get us in conformance. Just as a little aside, November 14th, there's going to be an orientation meeting, and Councilmember Lauren and Councilmember Callan, as the representatives, and myself are going to be attending. So we get to have an orientation, and then as associate members, both council members will participate in the meeting, and that's going to be held over in Woodland. The staff's recommending tonight that you just waive the second reading and adopt the ordinance.
Okay, any questions? I know I talked to Mitch Sears from Valley Clean Energy on Saturday, and he said he was unable to be here tonight for this due to I think some meetings for the CCA, so he couldn't be here. And I have no questions from council. I'll see if, is there anybody in the public that would like to speak or ask any questions to this item? Yes.
May I ask a question about
Yes,
it?
please come forward to the microphone.
All right. My name's Peter Meyer, and I just reading through part of it and about about the second part of the contract, and there was a lot in there about waiving the environmental acts and stuff. And I was just kind of concerned about that because I know some of these other agencies have gone through these public utility things, and they've gone through and done this in other areas. And one of them was Monterey County, where they put up all these wind turbines all over the place. Well, that's a big condor range. And just here in Winters area, Yolo County would have around 15 endangered species. So, I just want to make sure that, that the environment's going to be looked at before that they look too far into the whole climate. And there's just an article out today referring to the condor, where there's only about 100 right now in the condor range. And now you have all these turbines up there that are going to knock them out of the sky, or could. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
I can answer that. Tonight, we're adopting our ordinance, and under CEQA and under the CEQA guidelines that are issued through the state of California, the idea that we are adopting a CCA is not considered a project. Thus, us including CCA and the concept into our municipal code is not considered a project per se. Really good point about the various types of clean energy and the things that they do. Those in and of themselves are projects, and I know a lot of people on our planning commission, a lot of folks have gone to many of the meetings where we talked about everything from Swainson Hawk and Vernal Pool and all the clean energy and wind turbines and everything. There's a lot of controversy in those, but this is not that. What this is it's an adoption of a resource for which we join a collective and buying various types of energy, and nothing against the condors, but this doesn't have anything to do with that, except for on the VCE board, those types of considerations would come up. Do you want to buy wind energy, and where various energy comes from? And that's a really important part. It absolutely is.
Yeah, so we have two of our council members that will be on that board and be able to give input on any types of projects like that that would come up. So if we move forward with this tonight. Is there anyone else that would like to speak in the public? Okay, seeing none. Any further comments, questions? I think it's pretty clear. We've had several presentations on it, discussions, so if there is no further, I will open up for a motion.
I'll move the item. I move that the we waive the second reading and adopt ordinance 2019-4, an ordinance of the City Council, of the City of Winters, amending the Winters Municipal Code to add chapter 13.20 to be entitled Community Choice Aggregation Electricity and authorizing the implementation of a Community Choice Aggregation Program.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Passes unanimously. We can bring Councilmember Anderson back. Welcome back. Okay, the next discussion item is on establishing a climate action committee.
A couple of different things we're doing tonight. I'm introducing Christopher Flores, who's our new Civic Spark Fellow, who's been with us since early September. He's working on all things climate action related, which includes looking at committee formation. He's been jumping in with 2 feet, talking about helping with various greenhouse gas inventories when we get ready to do that, and also we'll go into more detail, but kind of looking at climate action plan coming to fruition, getting it approved, and then merging that with the strategic plan we've talked about, and also general plan related stuff. So I'll let him talk to you, and he's really jumped in with the community too. He's already volunteering at Salmon Festival, Hispanic Advisory, and Carnegie because he helped me take down the whole thing. So he's definitely getting involved. So there you go. Thank you.
You're welcome, Christopher.
Okay, I'm making sure that this is tall enough since I have a few inches here. Is that okay, volume-wise? Okay. Thank you for that introduction, Carol. Good evening, members of the council, mayor, and members here in attendance. I'm here to give you an update, so to speak, and tell you about what my role and I envision here during my time as a Civic Spark Fellow for the city up until the end of next July. I will just cue you, Tracy,
Sure,
and
that's
we
fine.
can progress. All right, let's move on. Essentially, I'm giving you an update on where we stand right now with climate action in the city of Winters. I should follow my introductions. So Carol mentioned that I am a Civic Spark Fellow serving until the end of next July. Civic Spark is an AmeriCorps program that's administered here in California through California Volunteers and the Local Government Commission. The overall goal and kind of achievement that Civic Spark as an organization wants to see come to fruition throughout California is provide the resources and capacity for local communities and agencies to work on climate resiliency projects, water quality, affordable housing, some very current issues that California is facing all across the state. I'm one of 90 fellows located, spread out throughout California, throughout the entire state. So I'm very fortunate to be here in the city of Winters to be working on climate in particular as an issue. So as I mentioned, these Civic Spark Fellows throughout the state have the overall goal and arching goal and what they're working towards is building that local capacity and resources for agencies and city governments that might not have the capability to do so on their own or just operate at a smaller scale. So some of the goals and things that I'd like to achieve for my time here and the service here while I'm here is to definitely get a finalized document available for the city to use moving forward, that being the Climate Action Plan, or CAP, as you'll hear me say this evening. And I know this isn't the first time a CAP has been discussed in a council meeting or brought to your attention, as there was a previous, and there is a working draft CAP right now. But it's in need of some updating and just actually needs to be finalized and adopted to serve its purpose moving forward for the future of California. Another one of the goals that I have is to transfer the knowledge that I'm building here during my time serving the city to existing city staff. So that way, come July, all this action on climate within the community isn't just put to a halt again. I'm essentially trying to build that rapport and support group to make sure that climate is on the table and being worked on in continuation past my time here serving the city. I suppose another goal, and the main reason I'm here tonight speaking to you, is working towards that and setting up the framework for a climate action committee within the city of Winters. So a climate action committee would essentially get volunteer, or not volunteer, but more engagement throughout the community and build that kind of strength and relationship that the city really needs moving forward for its future and the citizens here. So I won't go into detail about each of these little squares you probably can't see there, but I'm just going to mainly focus on that yellow middle one on the middle left. That's the climate action plan. And then you'll see, go ahead and progress, Tracy. There's a bunch of green squares, which I'm going to break down for you in more detail today. This is just a diagram that I use and I will be using for this year to help me figure out where I'm going to move forward with what I'm doing here for the city. So we'll focus on these 3 existing documents and I'll break them down a little bit. Won't go into too much detail with them, but just present the information of what's already available for the city. So on the right there, you'll see those documents. One of those is going to be the Climate Action Plan Strategy Report that was developed for the city. That kind of lays the framework about how to go about a climate action plan and the strategies to use. In addition to that, there's the draft climate action plan that I had mentioned, and then the recently completed YOLO Resiliency Collaborative Resiliency Planning Toolbox completed by a previous Civic Spark Fellow in Yolo County. These came and originated from some state legislation. There's some just brief reminders there, but California had set goals for itself moving forward. Some of those being 2020, which you've already achieved our greenhouse gas reduction goals as a state for that. But we have more ambitious goals moving forward through 2030 and 2050 that are going to require, so to speak, to reach for those not so low-hanging fruit and work towards the more difficult and ambitious goals that we have. Another component that is essentially working towards the urgency of developing and getting an adopted cap is SB 379, I believe. Yeah. Lots of numbers, and I'm definitely reviewing all those, but it's hard to remember which ones mean what. But SB 379 essentially is, as the city moves forward with developing or is in talks about updating their general plan or making revisions to a general plan or potentially creating a new general plan in sometime in the upcoming years, it will need to comply with a climate component in their safety element of the general plan. So there needs to be a discussion about that, and the climate action plan is a way to get that conversation started as we move forward with a new general plan or updated general plan for the city. And then here we're just breaking down those documents again, those existing resources that the city has. We have those suggested strategies from the strategy report that the city should pursue and would be fitting for the city's capabilities and its size. And then we also have the draft climate action plan right now. That's what I'm working with to get to the final one, and making those adjustments and updates as needed. And then finally, the YOLO Resiliency Collaborative Toolbox. That's essentially taking ready-to-use language that's already been developed by a previous fellow, and it's going to be implemented not just here in Winters, but throughout other jurisdictions throughout Yolo County that has formal language ready to be incorporated into documents like the CAP. All right, so that covers those existing pieces. Moving up, we have a regional greenhouse gas assessment inventory that's going to be completed sometime during the next year. My understanding is that those efforts are ongoing. This inventory assessment is being performed by Asset Environmental. The city's worked with them in the past, and the inventory is going to be a regional inventory consisting of City of Winters, Yolo County, City of Woodland, City of Davis, and then potentially West Sacramento. This regional greenhouse gas inventory would kind of put City of Winters on par with the rest of, and get a more cohesive sense of how inventories are conducted in the region, since every participant in this inventory would have consistent inventory analysis and procedures. So we'd be able to look and see how other cities might achieve or what their projections might be, and better see how we might make those adjustments moving forward in the future and see if there's things that we could learn from. Also, by having this regional assessment being done using a more recent baseline year, 2016 is the year that ASCENT is looking at conducting this inventory analysis with. It's a little bit more updated and preserves the viability of this CAP document. Right now, the working CAP has a 2005 baseline, which is a little bit outdated if we're going to plan for the future of climate here in winters. And then lastly, as I spoke earlier, I'm essentially here hoping to get feedback from council about forming a climate action committee here in the city of Winters to get that community engagement started within the community. The Climate Action Committee would essentially provide recommendations for City Council and give them guidance on issues related to climate or sustainability related issues, and advise them. It would consist of several voting members and non-voting advisory members. The logistics and numbers, and I provided a set of guidelines for you that I've kind of broken down. But just briefly, it would consist of about up to 11 members, but at least 5 of these members would be voting members that would present items to council. There would be one additional appointed member that would be an advisory member from city staff to make sure that all meeting proceedings from the committee would be made available to the public. And then those remaining 5 advisory members could originate from interested members in the community that have knowledge of community's needs, expertise in climate or other related fields, or just interested members in community or stakeholders that want to have their voice and opinion heard about where climate action could be directed here in Winters. As for next steps, again, that's essentially why I'm here this evening, is to get that feedback from council, whether if you've had time to review that structure that I've provided in the additional documents for you tonight. I'd like to get some feedback on if that structure is something that you'd be okay pursuing in the future, and if you have any recommendations for any improvements on those guidelines that you'd like to see made and taken into consideration. This is also an initial call, and just to let community members know that this committee hopefully will be moving forward, and if there's any interest or you know of anybody that would like to participate in the committee, so please get in touch with me. I have my contact information up there, and it'll be up there again. So that way I can start drafting a list of my interested community members that would like to potentially serve on the committee. And then all this talk of climate can have a lot of people excited about it, but if you're not necessarily sure of what your role or position might be in working with establishing a climate action committee, this goes for everyone here in the audience and just members of the council, that if you haven't done a self-assessment on learning about what your current carbon footprint is, I encourage you to do so. I've provided 2 resources here, one from the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and another one from California Air Resources Board. It's a good way to get that self-assessment done. So if you're looking at ways to learn more about your own personal climate impact and ways you can reduce your footprint, I highly encourage everyone here to check out these resources and see what you can do a little bit to reduce your impact. All right, this concludes my presentation. I'm open to hear comments from anyone in the audience, questions from council members, and that's it for me.
Great, thank you. Questions from council?
First, I wanted to say that I'm so happy that you're here and that this is on the agenda and that we're talking about it. And it's really important to us, and I think you've done a lot of great work here. So I want to thank you on that. I just have some questions. I think you answered one of them though. I was wondering who writes the agenda and takes the notes. I think that's the staff position, where the staff comes in.
That is correct. I ideally envision that the staff member would assist with preparing the agenda and making the meeting minutes available. I would assist the staff member during my time here as a Civic Spark during my service year to July. But I would essentially assist with developing those resources so that way, as my time concludes, whichever city staff member that would be appointed for this position would feel comfortable and knowledgeable to take on that task on their own.
And then I was just trying to envision like how a recommendation would work. So how would a recommendation from the committee go forth to council? Like what are your steps?
Right. So essentially, the committee would function and appoint its own chairperson and vice chairperson. The chairperson would be responsible for reporting to city council during council meetings on actions that the committee would like to suggest, or if there's agenda items on city council on the city council agenda that the committee has met and discussed agenda items and felt the need to make a comment or feedback to council, it would be the responsibility of the chair to make that effort and initiate that on their own to essentially address and make recommendations to council.
So the committee would be advisory to the council.
Yes, that's correct.
You have 4 voting members appointed by council, a youth member, an advisory member from city staff, and then where it says the committee may also include other non-voting advisory committee members from existing city committee commission bodies. I was just wondering if you're envisioning that their role would be advisory to that committee, or if they're more like liaisons from those other committees. Because in my mind, a liaison would be the right direction of the relationship. That there's not so many people advising this board because they're going to be advising the council, that those other bodies are liaisons to the group with their expertise. So I wanted some clarification on that and wondered if you could consider calling a liaison.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I had envisioned that those members would be advisory, and I didn't understand necessarily the distinction between what would be considered technically an advisory member or liaison member. I think you bring up a good point, though, that those suggested committee bodies have a lot of input and would be valuable members of as liaison members instead of just advisory. Essentially, if this committee is advisory, that's like you're saying, there's a lot of advisory pieces playing into that.
Yeah, I think you've done a really good job of fleshing it out. I think sometimes stuff comes to us like we want a committee or we want a commission, but people don't always flesh out what that is until many, many meetings later. And I think that you've built in a lot of structure. So I just wanted to thank you for that. But I would like liaison to replace the language.
Something I'm following with. There are really 3 key things that are going to work to be integrated. There's the draft climate action plan that we have, there's the strategy, and then there's the resiliency toolkit. At the end of the day, the main job of this committee will be to work towards the integration of these documents into a single climate action plan. One of the things that Chris pointed out is that the goal of not only his fellowship, but also by the end of doing all this, is that the policies will be integrated throughout the city's general plan. The best way to look at it is that you have that climate action plan, that everything is then scattered into the actual policy documents, whether it's water, sewer, conservation element, the circulation element. All those things are then amended into the fabric of how things are done. Chris is right. The idea that once his fellowship's done, once we put these things together, is that they're just going to carry on. And the best way to do that is that they're sewn into the policies and fabric of the things that we have. One of the things that we're going to bring a recommendation on is the idea of bringing some grant funds and some consultants to work with this committee on the overall climate action plan. There's a technical side, as Chris pointed out. Right now, the council approved our collaboration with the other cities in the county on the inventory. That's critical. From that inventory, it then comes down into calculation of the overall carbon footprint. That's another very technical element. But then, as far as the policies of the climate action plan go, that's where you have the integration of the draft plan, the overall strategy that came down. Carol got a $25,000 grant from the YOLO.
Energy Watch.
And so we have the strategy from the consultant. At the end of it, the committee will work with the consultant to put these things together. One of the main recommendations that will come out of the committee will not only be working with the consultant, integrating the documents, coming up with the plan, but then it will be the idea of how the implementation of this plan is then perpetuated. And ultimately, the best role will not only be working in the development of the plan, but then how that committee can work to be the outreach into the community to actually implement the plan. Because one of the things that we know is that there's considerable community outreach that needs to happen in all of this. Met with a good example. We met with the senior group and we said, okay, what are your goals? What are the things that you want to work on? That will be one of the things that this the committee will do. Ultimately, we'll not only have the documents, but then we'll have a vision on moving forward. And that, I think, would be one of the key advisory roles is, okay, how are we going to implement this thing? How are we going to make it happen?
I have another question that's just like sort of timing. I noticed that you have the Planning Commission, the Economic Advisory Committee, the Hispanic Advisory Committee, and the Senior Commission on Aging. Was the Peter Creek Council or Committee, I'm sorry, the Peter Creek Committee, possibly somebody to include, or?
Yeah, and I'd be willing to include that committee listed on there. That list isn't necessarily all comprehensive of existing bodies within the city of Winters. Those were just some that I was familiar with. So that's another committee that I'm less familiar with, but I could also include on there. Again, there's a little bit of language on there that those are just suggestions and that members not necessarily originate from those committees. As I mentioned, the committee would consist of a minimum 6, but up to 11 members, but not necessarily have to fill those 11 spots with those suggested or potential committee members.
I would just suggest that the Peter Creek Committee has an enormous amount of institutional knowledge about environmental stuff. It would be really exciting to include that.
Okay, I'll certainly make that change and adjustment.
Yeah, I'm not on the liaison part of it. I'm not sure if the Economic Advisory Committee is one that we met for, it's a short period of time. It's not one that meets regularly. So there would really be a representative from that committee that would be, best to serve on this. But I could see getting input from other committees as far as having a liaison there. I like the fact that you have, the committee itself, the voting members are, 5 members. I would assume, would you do outreach to the high schools, find a youth member? Those are 1-year terms, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Which is similar to what we have on our Peter Creek Park Committee. We have a youth member, and it's generally try to get somebody from the high school. Okay.
We kind of model it after the WPCC structure.
Okay. So John, I know there was a question that was brought up, an email that came out late today about the discussion whether it should be a committee or a commission. Can you kind of go over the differences between the two and what would be required if we went with a commission versus a committee?
Well, as we're getting ready, I think, Tracy, when do we have the orientation for the senior commission?
November 13th.
Okay, so next week, not that this is gonna be a short-term committee, but oftentimes, a committee within the framework of formality, once we start calling something a commission, an official advisory body to the council, there's a lot that comes into play in that. Next week, everybody is gonna sit down for 2 hours and get an AB 1234 training. Everybody's gonna be filing their assuming office statements. Everybody's gonna learn that they can no longer accept gifts from their friends on various things, or they have to be ready to report those types of things. And in the structure that's nice, the way that Chris has put it together, is that it gives folks a window of time to come in and actually accomplish something in putting the overall climate action plan together. And probably one of the most important things that the committee does, it's a little less formal. Are there going to be agendas? Absolutely. And the people involved will be very involved. But ultimately, at the end of it, there's not the bureaucracy that comes into it. And probably one of the things that this committee would do is they would make recommendations that if need be, that there's a formal commission to be formed, that they would make the recommendations on that. What would be the framework of it? This is, we're trying to make this a working group. But, if the council wants to go full-blown commission, there is a lot of formality to it, and the structure of the people that are on the committee. It's a bit of a bite, as I was describing with some of the most hardiest members. They're like, really? That's what I kind of got myself into, and I'm like, yep. So we're actually scheduling a full-blown orientation for them. And, for the seniors, and what we're not going to talk about? We're not going to talk about any senior issues at this meeting. It's going to be, we're going to cut their hair and give them a uniform. Welcome to the Army.
I just have one question. What's the timeline to, if this passes, to start appointing people?
So originally, while I was drafting this, I was very optimistic and was very hoping to have a very quick turnaround and potentially get interested members, depending on how quickly I receive responses from members of the community and recommended members before the end of the calendar year. But then I had a reality check and revised or reviewed some of the recently formed Senior Commission on Aging, is that correct? And saw that they had initially given their proposal, I believe, for the committee formation in April or May of earlier this year. And I believe the first city council meeting I came as the Civic Spark Fellow, it was in quite more attendance than what's here this evening, and I was kind of floored based on how many people were here. But I realized that there were a lot of people that cared about that commission and all the work that had gone into it. So I realized that this might be a multi-month process, and I had envisioned that it would hopefully have at least a recommendation for council before the end of the calendar year to consider appointments. But now I'm looking at it that it might continue on through January and potentially February of next year. But I would hope to have, I'm optimistic that before spring, at the very latest, I would like to have members seated on the committee.
Well, since at this time in this format, it's not a commission, perhaps because we're just appointing, it can happen a lot faster. I mean, the commission will take longer, but the committee won't take as long.
Yeah, I would agree. I would see less formalities with forming the committee than there is with commission. And we might be able to do it in a shorter timeline. And I would, if we move forward, I would be happy to see it happen sooner rather than later.
December 3rd.
I agree. That would be very helpful.
Okay. Tonight, Chris is taking input. From the input, what we can do is, depending on how ambitious Chris is on getting the staff report done, we can probably have the framework back to the council in 2 weeks. Or just based back by December 3rd. So to get this thing going. And one of the things we do, Chris did a good job on this presentation. We can put it up on our website. I think we're probably going to have a climate tab that's going to go up onto our website that we'll have Chris build that. But we'll start getting the word out on everything. My sense is that we're probably going to move forward on this thing. So we'll start getting some word out. Tracy has the application. She and Chris can work together and we can start getting this stuff going.
Any questions from the council? I know we have at least one person in the audience that would like to speak to us. Kailash, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Mayor. And I'd like to start with very big thanks to Civic Spark Fellow Christopher Flores and Carol Sienna for all of their work on this project. It's tremendously important. I really appreciate everything you're doing. And how did you guess I might have public comment on this? I mean, independent from oh, I'm sorry. I should say, Kate Laddish, 400 Morgan Street, number 21. You waving the paper reminded me. So as I've said at previous City Council and Planning Commission meetings, addressing climate change, both by decreasing winter's contribution to it and by increasing our resiliency to its effects, is of utmost importance. I'm very heartened that an official winter's body will be tasked with issues related to climate change. And a couple of the issues that I have in my comments, which I've submitted to Tracy by email for inclusion in the record, have actually already been covered in some of the discussion that happened. But harkening back to the April 16th council meeting, several council members directed staff to consider this being a climate commission rather than a committee, and to make sure that this was a body that would be advisory to council. And so I appreciate that in what Chris Flores has outlined is advisory to council, but I think this is a very important issue, and we're asking people to consider some really major topics. And let's do it in a way that creates an organization, a body that can work within Winter's decision-making process in a way that is most effective. And if that is to have a commission, I think then that is a very good thing to explore. And so a couple questions that I'm hoping that council or staff can address or answer. I have a little more clarity now than I did before the discussion, but I still have I'm still a bit unclear about what exactly the mission will be of this new committee or commission. And how much is it limited to the implementation of the climate action plan, or is it broader? Or how does it, how would this organization look at the issues related to the general plan that City Manager John Dunleavy mentioned? And so my sense from previous discussions and from this evening is that it wouldn't be entirely just limited to the climate action plan, or would it be just looking at the climate action plan and how it plugs in? So I would look forward to council having a discussion about formalizing what the mission of this would be. I also would like some more clarity on how this climate committee or commission would fit within Winter's decision-making structure. So we know how issues move between the planning commission and the city council, and then how will this new body fit in? And since the climate committee or commission would work on related issues, it's particularly important to figure out ahead of time what the flow of information and decisions will be. And so what's the mechanism for that to happen? And what's the weight of anything considered by this new group? And what's that exchange of information? I'd like for us to make sure that we understand what that is before moving forward, so that we don't approve something and then realize that actually we're not quite sure how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. So, and something that actually was addressed would be, what would the term about the advisory members was addressed. I actually also would enjoy seeing these members described more as liaisons rather than as advisory members. That would, I believe, follow more closely the model of the Winters Peter Creek Committee. And disclaimer, I'm a member of the Winters Peter Creek Committee. And speaking of which, I think that would be a good organization to have a liaison onto this committee. And so, and then I have a question about how the members will be chosen. In the PowerPoint, it indicated that City Council to consider membership recommendations provided by staff. And so I request that Council direct staff to have membership of this new body be decided in the same way as membership in other bodies, such as the Senior Commission, and with council involvement. And to my recollection, this is the first real opportunity that council has had to directly discuss what this new organization within our city would be. And so I think it's, as you can guess, since I talk about it every time there is a possible opportunity to talk about the Climate Action Committee / Commission / whatever other name it might have had as it's moved through here. I'm really enthusiastic about this. I'm very excited about the work on it. That said, I'm enthusiastic about this enough that I urge council to make sure that we have everything in place and that we've all figured it out and that we all realize we're talking about the same thing before moving forward. And so if that means that we need to have a deeper discussion about it and hold off on any vote, as enthusiastic as I am about getting this in place, I would be really in favor of having an in-depth discussion to make sure that the body that is created is what works best for our city and is what we most need for our city, and that we all enter into it with the same understanding. And I think we're well poised as a community to have that good discussion. And climate change is a very important topic, ties in with a lot of key city issues. And so I'd like us to make sure that we take the time to go into this with a very clear understanding of what we're embarking upon. Thank you so much for considering these issues as we enter this very exciting project.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak from the public? Okay. Your comment, another comment?
Another comment.
Okay.
So when we talk about it at the next meeting, we have some sort of maybe possible mission statement or devise a kind of at least introduction of what they'll be doing.
There's a listing there of duties that the Climate Action Committee is tasked with the following duties that Mr. Flores has put together. For that.
Yes, I was actually just gonna suggest you take a peek at those duties, and Kate, I'm not sure if you had some familiarity with those duties. Should I read them aloud as I've listed some of the mission goals for this committee?
Sorry, what was that?
Are you familiar,
I was able, Carol, I couldn't read your presentation in the packet, so Carol sent me a copy. So
Okay,
I've read it through. And I still have questions.
Okay.
And so just reading what's already there wouldn't help
Right,
clarify.
okay.
But thank you for that.
And then I didn't want to waste everyone's time reading those. I would be willing to revise that and make that a more cohesive vision statement for the committee. I think having a specific section in the document that has those outline duties is still valuable moving forward, separate from a mission statement. And part of that reasoning is these duties are things that the committee will do moving forward in the future and that will be ongoing. I think it's important to have that separate and easily accessible for the committee as they work on addressing climate issues here in the community. So I'd be willing to make those changes, and some of the suggestions and concerns that Kate had also brought up, I hadn't necessarily fully realized, or, hadn't thought too much and given as much consideration into these items about how recommendations are brought to council. Does it have to be in a formal setting like this in a council meeting? Or can that be through just communication, letter, email to council on recommendations that they'd like to see discussed? I hadn't really thought about how that method of communication, how formal that should be. I had envisioned that it would be the chair making those recommendations and advising council on issues that they felt needed to be addressed. But yes.
Probably typically, and recommendations that come from committees and the planning commission and the like, usually whether it comes from a member of the commission or from staff, within the framework that Chris has outlined in the duties, probably the most important one, and it'll be included in the resolution, which establishes the committee, is supporting the implementation of the climate action plan. That's actually a really big deal. A climate action plan is a combination of policy document and also technical document. It's got two very important sides to it. A climate action plan is required to be adopted through an environmental impact report. Very costly. So the idea of the formulation of the policies that trail along with all the technical analysis that's gone on, that is probably the single most important part of what this committee would do from the outset. In order to do the climate action plan, we'll have to bring in some consultants, and they're going to have to work with staff. The city engineer, planning staff, everybody. And in so many ways, the role of the committee will not only be to play a part in how these things are integrated, but there's an entire implementation side of how the climate action plan goes. And that's where all the outreach and all that stuff goes. So they become, Kate's question, how would they fit into the process with everything? The best way to describe it is that they will become a critical aspect of the outreach and the actual implementation of the document. When you look at the draft climate action plan, of the 172 items that were on there, they are all about outreach, how you get information out to people. The one thing that the climate action plan will do when we talk about integrating it within the fabric of the city's policies and general plan, those things then become very technical. This is how things are done regarding energy. This is how things are done regarding GHG, the idea of the integration with our circulation element, our bike and pedestrian stuff. There'll be all these recommendations that are scattered in there. The committee will then become a key part in promoting all of that. But at the end of the day, the recommendations will probably come through either if somebody from the committee wants to come and do it, or it'll come from staff.
I think that would work well. I like the idea of kind of patterning it after how we do the Peter Creek Park Committee. It sounds like it will be very similar to that as far as setting it up. And
I think one of the kind of the weak points in the WPCC is that we haven't had enough interaction with the council, and so I mean that's definitely something that we would want to see improved.
yes. Okay. Councilmember Anderson?
Yeah, one thing I would favor is splitting people away. Peter Creek. There's Peter Creek communities. Essentially.
So for that, we have each council member appointed one person, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And then others are laid out in
We could certainly provide a list, well, Chris could collect names, so people
Mhm.
listed, and I have, on this I've been working on, so we could certainly pass on those names to council members. And so that would be different than the formal interviewing process that you
Right.
did.
For the commission.
Yeah, so. It seems to have worked well for the WPCC.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's worked well over the years. Comments?
I'm happy with what I've heard.
Okay, sounds like you're getting, the okay to move forward with, what you have outlined here and coming back to a future meeting with some more concrete, recommendations on what we do, so. That sounds good to council?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much
yeah.
for all your work on this.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to make one more just a brief note. I attended a climate research symposium in Sacramento today, and one of the takeaways that I really, felt invested in, felt like sharing with everybody here that this conversation about climate is important, and the fact that it's happening in the first place means that the city is making progress to address climate, not only here in California, but on a global scale. So I just want to make sure that that's recognized and taken into consideration that tonight, that just having a conversation about climate change and what's going on here in the community and how it will affect vulnerable populations and anyone that's in the community is important. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to discussion item number 4, which is SCADA equipment upgrades for the water and sewer equipment.
Mayor and council, number one, this came out of the meeting last Wednesday, when all of a sudden we realized that our software system that supports our telemetry of our water and sewer pumps is going to stop working at the end of this year. Staff's asking that the council approve an expenditure of $38,119, and it's outlined in a staff report that I get into you, and I apologize for not getting this thing out. It just, there's sometimes when the one-man band misses an instrument on a couple of things. We actually looked and received proposals from 3 different companies, Telstar, Tesco, actually 4 companies, Telstar, Tesco, Company X, and then the 4th proposal actually will represent the future of where things go for how we do all of our SCADA within our utilities, which is a cloud-based system. Tonight's recommendation, we're recommending the lowest proposal that we got through Telstar. We worked with Telstar already. This is an upgrade. We use a system called Wonderware that we come in. It integrates directly with our overall server system that we have. The difference between this and the cloud-based system, the cloud-based system is almost $250,000, and it has an absolutely insane annual cost on it. Ultimately, we will have to go to the cloud-based systems as just the evolution of technology goes. What does this do? Believe it or not, within the various wells that we have, there is a lot of equipment that does a whole multitude of various things. We have various variable frequency drives which run the electricity, that run the motors. We have the motors. At water wells, we are disinfecting the water with chlorine. Our wells talk to each other through the various system. There's a whole series of types of alarms that go off that notify our staff. We're more high tech than we look. within the multiple devices that we use, whether it's computers, our tablets or cell phones, there's a lot to the overall system. I guess my understanding is that if we don't upgrade the system by the end of the year, the system won't know the day or time, which will throw a wrench into any emergency calls that we get and various things. Staff's asking the approval on this. I think the council knows my overall expenditure authority is $30,000. So this kind of went over it. That's why it's before the council tonight. So if you have any questions, if anything, I'd ask the council just to give an approval to spend $38,119 on the upgrades of the Wonderware system.
So is this a one-time charge? Is there annual charges go along with it, or?
No,
It's
Annual
a,
charges just one time?
yeah, so this is a one-time. We do receive support from them, but that's just in the ongoing operations of things. But in this case, this is the purchase of the actual software. So it is one time, but as we all know, anybody that's got an iPhone or whatever, it's never a one-time
But
charge.
it will include upgrades for how long?
We estimate that this purchase is probably good for 5 or 7 years. As we move forward though, the one thing that I've asked our water and wastewater teams to do is to begin putting together a capital expenditure to phase out of the Wonderware system and move into a cloud-based system. It's just the way that it's gonna go. The software is not the way to go anymore. You have to go with a cloud-based system.
It's ever changing.
It's great.
Questions? I mean, I've been in some of those rooms where we have the wells, and I've seen the equipment they have in there for controlling these things. It's pretty impressive. So I think it's important that we have our software that actually works to know what's going on when we have to switch over to the generators, all these different things that happen with our BSPS that we are now living with and things like that. And there's a pretty complicated system, keeping our water running and keeping it safe, putting the chlorine in at the right levels and communicating with everybody that works here. So I think it's pretty important.
Yeah, let's avoid a water Y2K.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we're staring down right now.
Anyone in the public that would like to comment on this? No? Okay. Anybody else on the council?
No.
Okay, seeing none, I will then open it up for a motion.
I'll move to approve the proposal from Telstar Instruments for software upgrades to water wells and sewer pump equipment estimated at $38,119.
Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? None? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And one last thing I want to mention before we move on to the city manager's report is just to say, express our gratitude to Gar House for his willingness to continue serving. I think he stepped out already. But to thank him for serving on the Sacramento Yellow Mosquito Vector District Board that he serves on for us. He's provided us with reports on the meetings he goes to. He's done a great job, so I just want to make sure that we acknowledge that and know that how much we appreciate it. The last thing we have, I believe, for tonight is the city manager's report.
Just a couple of items. First, just to let the council know, we're going to start maybe a little more active rollout of the city app for our cell phones. We've got a pretty good basis of that, but from the staff perspective, I think we could probably do a little more active job of getting people onto the app. I think the staff's done a pretty good job on it. We just need to get people to have it and be ready for people to use it. Councilmember New mentioned the CityCog Futures Forum. It really was, it was very interesting. But it's kind of tough for, this little model city in Colorado gets up and, they're just 15,000 people, and they've got 2 light rail systems coming into their city, and they've got a population of 15,000 people, and they got 50,000 jobs, and I'm just sitting there, and poor council member New had to hear me kind of say, was that Emeryville? Was that Emeryville that was presenting? It was just a different world, and it was good, but there were plenty of takeaways, and I'll probably include those in the upcoming city manager's report. The mechanics of Valley Clean Energy, they're going to be meeting with various groups in town. We're setting up for them to meet with some of the major business players in town, just so that they feel comfortable with where things are going. So look for some of those announcements. They aren't formal like city meetings. They want to actually have some pretty more intimate discussions with some of the business people so that they can ask very pointed questions and give some pretty good information. As the mayor pointed out tonight, we had the meeting with neighbors regarding Olive Grove. I know the city attorney has sent a letter to the developer on that project. One of the things that's not here tonight that I promised the council that I would get to, kind of the planned projects list. I will give you a heads up that on November 19th, one of the things that we'll be bringing is by the end of November, it's required that we submit our grant applications for SB2 monies. The city gets about $160,000. I will tell you that I'm putting together the grant application. Council's going to have to adopt a resolution for that. The evil of SB2 is the fact that it's supposed to provide streamlining and means for expediting the production of housing in California. There are going to be 2 main things, and the council already is, and the community is already aware of 2 main efforts. The projects that I'm working on right now that seem to fit like a glove. One is moving towards our climate action plan and components of that. And the second is there is part of the presentation on August 21st, but also in the plan has to do, there's an 11 component part of going through and looking at our general plan. And so I'm looking to pair both of those in an overall grant application. They fit. I will tell you that the ropes, the torches, and the pitchforks would come out if we tried to submit any project proposals that is on the preferred policy alternatives. So we'll bring that on the 19th for the council to look at with the entire planning projects list that I've given the council. So other than that, that's my report.
Yeah, I just wanted to also say thanks to our city attorney for getting that letter out to the Olive Grove Development Group. And it's been needed for quite a while. I'm glad we finally got it out, and hopefully it will bear some fruit and get some protection in for the neighbors around there. So on that, I will adjourn the meeting at 8:06. Thank you.
Use various types of euphemisms. It's gonna rain results.
Yeah.
It's just things that stuff's just gonna start pouring.
Let's not have any more until it's done.
Okay, great. Yeah.
He's really gonna dig in once he gets that. Fix everything.
Here's a really very nice.
Good job. It's gonna bring an avalanche of results.
Really interested in that sweat equity housing. Pretty so great. Maybe, in your spare time.
I did, yes, thank you.
Yeah. The stuff on Calvert was really engrossing and amazing. I was surprised that I was, reading it by actuarial. But, I did send out a presentation to John Fitzgerald. And then I have one that's from that, the resilience, climate resilience one. I have forwarded that one on the census. They're all on the, they're on the computer. I can forward it.
Okay, well, you know what, we
Presentation.
The lady that did it, Lisa Newsom, is a council member and mayor from Congress. And, she gave out her number and said, you guys have heard Calvert's questions, call me, like, I don't know, so any problem with the city. He was like, what? No, yeah, that has to do with CalPERS. And, yeah, have your city manager call me.
She'll help solve it.
Yeah, you should probably, she's like, you know what she reminded me?
Is just not that.
No, she did a really great job of it and made it interesting. And it's not entertaining, but at least like, really dire and important. It was a good presentation. There's some nice, nice ways of organization of time and money and where it goes. So everybody can understand. So it's not a